Hey, Chris, thanks for joining us today. As we're getting started, give us a little background on yourself.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Chris Keene. I'm currently head of channel sales at VergeSense, which is an IoT hardware company where we sell occupancy detection devices. So it counts how many people are in a room or how many are at a pod of desks. But prior to this, really, I started out in sales when I got out of college selling planners, day planners to colleges and universities. So printing industry, we were actually doing something unique. We were buying and printing all the books in China, and then we were importing them in and undercutting the competition for a significant amount and taking a pretty big margin too. So that was kind of my foray into dialing for dollars, you know.
Wow.
But quickly I started to realize, you know what, technology might be a better path. So I eventually got reached out to by recruiters who said, hey, we sell this software called Integrated Workplace Management Solutions, and we want you to come and help us break into the higher ed market because you have higher ed experience. And I was like, okay, great. So I started at this software company. It was called Manhattan Software, which is now owned by MRI, which is a fairly large
Yeah.
property management company. And at the time, we were working on some higher ed. We got into some Ivy League schools, great. But we also discovered, you know what? Chris can be just as effective working on corporate accounts as well. So then we really started to focus in on corporate. From there, the company was acquired by Trimble, big Fortune
Yeah.
500 company that nobody's ever heard about. Once that acquisition happened, I decided, you know what? I need a company that's a little bit more nimble. I can write my own rules, be a cowboy again. So I went over to a small company called Saraview, which was an Australian company that had come into the US doing the same thing as I was doing at Manhattan, except they were doing it in a little bit of a different way, better visualizations. And it was only about a 50-person company. So, I felt like I was back in the saddle. We hit the ground running. It was awesome. We had a good 3-year run until we were eventually acquired by JMI Equity. And then it's subsequently been acquired by Thoma Bravo. But when that JMI Equity acquisition happened, I stayed on for a little while and decided, I need to go to a company where I can be agile and nimble and free again. So I went to go work for this company called VergeSense, which when I joined, it was about a 30-person company. Now it's about 130. But it just gave me everything back that I love about sales. You're selling green technology, that nobody really knows about. You've got to plant seeds. You've really got to focus on compelling events because there are none, right? When you're selling something that's
It's
new, it's
new.
not like
Yeah.
they're like, oh, we have an upgrade coming up and we need to replace this server. It's like, we don't have anything coming up. Tell us why we should buy them now. So it's
Well,
a little bit more
that,
difficult,
that sounds like it's too hard, though. I like the upgrade. That's pretty easy. They've already bought it. The paper's in place. Everyone likes it.
Oh yeah. It's very challenging. And that's one of the things though that we have to train so hard on at VergeSense is like every interaction, a lot of times these people are going to come in and they're going to say, hey, we really want to hear about sensors. And some of the reps who are used to kind of inbound strategies
Yeah.
take that and they'll qualify the hell out of them and say they're not ready to buy. I'm like, well, no kidding. You've got to explain to them why they need to buy these things, plant seeds and landmines for your competitors, and then 6 months from now they'll return back and say, hey, we're ready to buy. Thank you for teaching us everything about this industry. But there's not enough of that today in sales, especially with the younger crew coming in, is thinking, hey, my BDR is just going to serve me up 50 new leads and I'm going to be set.
Yeah. Well, that, I wish that was the way it was working, don't you?
Yeah. Oh, that would be awesome for
Yeah.
salespeople to be able to just qualify all day and move them off. But the reality is it's something in between. Even at companies with a good inbound strategy, you still have to plant those seeds and get people, get them that content that lets them understand what you're doing, and leads them back to your product and you as the trusted advisor.
Well, that's it because, even with like the product-led growth or inbound, you still got to get them to talk to you.
Yeah, exactly.
Otherwise, they're just on your website, which is nice, but they're not going to buy that way, right?
No, you've got to get them talking. Another big thing is just domain expertise. We're in a small niche corporate real estate technology industry, right? So corporate real estate is really just office space.
Yeah.
But it's very tiny, our ecosystem of people that are in this niche. So they immediately, and when I train up BDRs, I have to go through the same thing. Hey guys, you got to get on as many calls as you can. You need to speak their language. So if you can't, they're going to detect it within about 30 seconds and they're going to say, all right, I'm done. See you later. But once you get good at it and you know how to talk the way they talk and ask them about, what lease accounting system they use and what they've been doing for chargebacks and all these other terms that we have, then you're in the game. And that's when the SDRs get pumped and we eventually bring them up to AE status or bring them into channel sales because they're ready to take that next leap.
Now, was the experience in higher ed helpful? Because I got to imagine higher ed's one of the most difficult markets to get money. You can get meetings, but not money.
Getting meetings is very easy in higher ed, as you said.
Yeah.
Getting money is very difficult. That was a couple of those sales cycles took 9 to 12 months. And it involved me, of course, flying back and forth up to Rochester, New York to meet with a university that I won't name. But I went up there a bunch of times. We had to do hands-on demos. I had to become an expert of demoing because we were getting so many calls and questions about like, how does the system do this? But the beauty of it is that since it's such like kind of that collegial environment, we were usually only selling a single module to universities. But what we found was it was very easy for us to branch off into other modules, and get buy-in from these other groups, other departments within the university. So that our tiny deal turned into a much larger deal. It took us longer, but finally, when we, got our commission checks, we were like, okay, it was definitely worth it.
Yeah. Cool. And what about sales lights your fire? What drives you?
Yeah. I think number one is still the old school prospecting,
Really?
because that's how I started. Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of my favorite things to do is work with the BDRs at any company that I go to, right? And we work on their templates, we work on their scripts, we work on the subject lines, we see what's resonating. Nowadays, they have all these awesome tools, HubSpot, there's dozens of others. I'm not an expert on them, but they show me them, right? And it gives all these statistics. Hey, they're opening up this page and that page, and they spent 3 minutes. And then it's fun to go back and craft and say, okay, well, if they're interested in this, then we have other content over here that we could send them and ask for a conversation, and then we can get things moving. I love the strategy of hooking the fish, so to speak.
Yeah.
Reeling it in becomes very procedural and kind of just a thing that I think all salespeople get really good at, right? But for me, that's just kind of that comes along for the ride. Hooking them up front is the most fun. Like when you get somebody to say, hey, I really like your product and I'm thinking of moving forward with you guys. Oh, man, that gets me fired up.
And what part of sales do you feel you're the best at? Not best in the world, but best, because some of us are prospectors, some of us are closers, some of us are presenters. Yeah. Some of us are take out to dinner and relationship folks. And
I would say the closing side is one of my favorites as well, and where most of my successes lie. Because at the end of the day, you do need to get that compelling event. You need your close plan. You need all your dates tight, and you need to have also a really good relationship with that champion or that buyer on the other side to make sure that they are willing to take time out of their vacation sometimes to come back and sign your deal, because that's what happens. So the closing aspect of it is the one that I tend to lean towards because that's the most important. And I've had different strategies at different companies, right? Some of the companies I work at, like the one I'm at right now, it's very much a land and expand. So closing that initial deal, very important, right? And then from there, it's just getting bigger and bigger orders after that. So I really like closing that initial deal because that's the fun stuff, right? A new customer you bring on, it feeds the company, everybody's pumped, new logo, yeah, that's the best.
And how do you, or what's your sixth sense there? Is it, when to close it? You know how to close it? You know what needs to happen to close it? Because, it can look like it's closable in a month.
Right.
And I got to believe in your business, they could buy one, but that's not exciting, right?
No, that doesn't get me out of bed. It's the steps and the timing of each of the things that need to happen in order to get that closed. And a good seller in a lot of cases, especially you'll see it in their close plans. Usually, at least my close plan has a little set of notes that are specifically for my buyer that says, hey, it's going to take 12 weeks on average to go through contracts. Do you believe that this sounds good on your side, or do you think we're going to need a little more time? And the idea is I'm continually going to compress that schedule down tighter and tighter to make sure that I get buy-in, of course, from my buyer on the other side, but also so that we can condense it to, a palatable time frame to close that thing. Otherwise, how this goes, right? Oh yeah, it'll close next week. And, we're into July and people are like, yeah.
Any day now.
Yeah, it's coming. It's coming.
It's in procurement or in my inbox, one or the other.
Yeah. It's with legal. Yeah. Oh, informative. Great.
And are you in the type of sale where there has to be some kind of legal agreement physically signed?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Every single one of them. We do not have click-through agreements. So we do have to have everyone review about a 12-page SSA, software subscription agreement. And they have to go through and, review our privacy policy, limitation liability, indemnity, all the good stuff that's in contracts. And then one nice thing I think about working for small companies is we do have an outside counsel, of course, but we all have to learn as sellers to be able to negotiate that contract on our own. So it's nice, especially when you get to train some of the younger guys that are up and coming. They're like, oh, let's just send this to the attorneys. I'm like, no. You review it first. You come to me, we review it again, and then we take what we can't solve, like indemnification and limitation liability, back to the attorney,
And that's it, because 9 times out of 10, it comes down to the liabilities limited to the contract size, right?
Yes,
yeah.
Correct.
So
we help set those limits, but I always say to the younger guys, hey, if there's anything that's capitalized in a contract, the lawyers should probably just look at that, right? Yeah. If it's capitalized in bold, it's for them, but everything else is us,
And you tend to run into trouble when they have outside counsel, right? Because then you got people being incentivized to drag it out.
Well, exactly. Incentivized to drag it out. What we always try to do is make sure that we have the business come in on those negotiations so that it's not just lawyer to lawyer. I mean, that's really the only way to do it, to expedite that contract process. And we use pretty old school strategies, right? We horse trade different things, some things we don't care about, but we want to horse trade that for a lower indemnity. All that type of stuff is what we usually work through to get those contracts across the line.
And when do you know to take the deal off the table versus keep it in the oven for a while and let it bake and get bigger?
That's a challenging one. Now, if you're selling a product, I think that has multiple, this is where I see this coming up the most. And I've seen this happen to reps a lot of times where you have a product that has a ton of modules, right? And typically you're going to sell a client 1 or 2 modules first just to get your foot in the door. And then you're going to try to upsell them later on. Well, what happens is sometimes their eyes get a little bit too big and they try to sell all modules at once, right? So there's a certain point in the deal where you have to kind of weigh all of your options, right? It's like, okay, I could just take this thing down for the space and the ops module, and then I could wait on lease. or I could wait on transactions, or whatever those other modules are. But you have to have all your good notes from discovery and everything you've learned written in one place. So you can go back and double check that. And if you know there's something coming up that's compelling, like, okay, I know they're having a lease audit at the end of this year. I'm going for the gold. I'm tacking on that lease module right now. Then I'll do it, right? That's when I'll keep it in the oven, keep going, keep working it, right? And get it as big as I can. But in a lot of cases, at least with buyers these days, we find the most important thing is just to get those 1 or 2 modules fast and then expand. Because I think the days of back up the truck are more or less gone. It happens from time to time. We've all seen it, but it's very difficult to pull off in this day and age.
Because I assume there's competitors out there.
Correct.
So every deal, you probably have at least a couple of competitors, and to take it off the table, it's smaller, kind of eliminates the competition.
It does. Yeah.
And
very competitive market. And that's one of the things, we have to be laser focused on differentiators, laser focused on how our mousetrap is better than every other mousetrap. And that is how we win. We have to set those proper landmines. We have to know what our competition is up to. And we have to prepare when we go out and pitch to make sure that we are accounting for what they're going to go out there and pitch, right? It can't just be hey, let's tell them why we're the best. We also have to combat against, well, what's that competitor going to say for why they're the best? Because we're going to have to inject something in our presentation that goes directly against that, of course. But that's the fun part, I think, for a lot of salespeople when they're out presenting or in front of clients, is being able to set those traps a lot of times for your competitors coming in.
And I'm sure you've learned a lot of lessons along the way, because I got to believe you get that hungry buyer who says they want the whole suite, they want the truck backed up, but they don't have access to the vault, right? They've heard where the vault is,
right?
But they've never visited it,
right?
And they, so you fall in love with that person. What are some of the lessons you've learned along the way? Either false champions or champions overstating their capacity and capability of getting a deal done, that they may not have given visibility to the people who can authorize this?
Yeah, it happens all the time, especially with these sensors that we sell right now. You get people, again, that have big eyes, right? So they say, you know what, Chris, they'll come in and say, Chris, I would like a quote for a couple floors. And I'm like, okay, all right, let's dig into your use cases. Why do you want them? All the typical stuff, success criteria. And then someone comes back, usually a week later, usually someone senior, and says, well, I want to know what would happen if I deployed these across the entire world in all my buildings, right? And the number one lesson we've learned is never give that person a price.
And why not?
When he sees that it costs $6 million year over year to support thousands of sensors, he's going to lose his mind, So, and it's very important a lot of times, because usually that's when the boss comes in and asks for that bigger price. And that's when we need to slow it down, go back to our champion, and we actually want to keep our scope exactly as it is. So like when we train, one of the things we do too is train a lot of our partners. Yeah. And when we train them, we basically say, look, this is going to sound weird to you, but we actually want to decrease scope as much as we can for this first land opportunity, right? So don't get distracted with this. Oh, we want to put them in the whole building. Because as soon as they see that price tag, it's over. Right now, people can do math. They're not fools. If it costs $30,000 for a floor and they have 30 floors, 30 times 30. But it's weird that when you put it on paper and you show them that $900,000 number, right? We did the math for them. They're like, oh my gosh, this is so much. It's like, well, yes.
The other trick is they want the $6 million thing, and then they want the volume discount for the 2 floors.
Oh, that one is the oldest in the book. That one's just like the hey, we've got a discount and it expires at the end of the quarter. And then so I'm
It's
only going to buy
disappearing.
it to extend it another 2 weeks. Same thing.
Yeah. Because yeah, that's kind of I ran into the latter one more often than the former. But the former you don't really hear about because people, oh, we're not doing that. It's too expensive.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And it's too big of a chunk, even if they wanted to do it.
Right.
And they might not do it for what, 3 or 4 years to do a
Yeah.
worldwide
Well, that's
implementation.
the thing. It's going to take, we have some customers who have almost full global deployment, which is somewhere around 10,000 sensors. It's a lot of devices, but it's taken them 6 years to get that far. And I think a lot of people think they're just going to kind of leapfrog over all the pains that you have to go through to install new technology, because we all know implementing this stuff is very challenging. There's a lot of obstacles. But you can't leapfrog, right? You got to learn your lessons up front, and then you've got to make some decisions once you see if these things actually add value. Could we accelerate this deployment? Could we expand? Will this work for us? So that's kind of the tricky part is just having that. You have to have that right feel of the deal, because occasionally you do have to give that price. You know how it is. Maybe you get a C-level person that says, look, we're not going to talk to you anymore unless you give us this price. You may have to make a decision there if you're just going to say hard, no, we're not giving you this price. Most of the time it's somewhere in the middle where I'll say, I will give this to you, but first I would like you to sit through a pitch, and I would like you to look at the pricing that we've laid out. And I'd like to explain to you why most of our customers start out really small. And then eventually over years and years and years, they go through this customer journey and they get to the end state, right? That's really the only way to combat it in a lot of situations.
Yeah, because you know what's going to happen. If you give the enterprise, they're going to want it for the one, or they're going to remember that price forever. And typically they're nowhere near ready. They just want to ferret it out. They want to pound their chest a little bit.
Of course.
But I'm sure you've sat through a few QBRs in your life, right? When you hear other reps present deals. And I'm sure you've had your own opinion about the deals, even though you're not deep into them. How can you tell when they're going to close or not? What are you listening for?
First and foremost, I want to make sure they have a really good understanding of course, the use cases and the pain points of the client. It's old school, right? But I want to make sure that discovery was airtight. And that for us includes, we want to know what service providers are in there, what partners are around the periphery, and what services do they provide, what other systems do they use? Because when you have a technology like this, it's a data source that feeds into other technologies that are already in place.
Yeah.
So if the reps have a really good understanding of that, we have a really good chance of surrounding that deal with all the partnerships that we've made, right? So the number one thing, the alarm bells that go off in my head, if somebody stands up there and says, I'm doing this deal direct, and I don't really have a champion, and it's going to close next month, I'm like, this is insane. So one, you don't have a good person on the end client side, and two, you haven't mentioned any partners. You need partners in these deals because everything's so interconnected in corporate real estate, and it is in a lot of industries too, right? You're always going to have partners nibbling around the edges, and they're really the trusted advisors if this is a net new client for you. So you have to leverage that relationship to make sure you can get in and seal the deal. They can also be sources of information. So for me, I'm really bullish about this, but it's the way I've always sold, is if I don't have 2 or 3 partners that I can't call up on the phone and ask about this deal, I'm not feeling good about it, right? Because that means I'm going it alone, and I'm only getting information that end client wants me to hear. I'd rather hear the information from a partner who can say, hey, you might want to be careful with what Sally told you last week, because I actually heard from her boss that.
Well, I also got to imagine that there's a lot of people who want to learn about your product and technology because it's new, it's cool.
Yep.
ideas start popping into their heads of how they could leverage it.
That's right.
But how do you get from there to justifying it economically? Because the people above, they're like, okay, so what, right?
Oh yeah. It all comes down to, the old school ROI analysis,
Yeah.
right? And these have become, I like mine to be as simple as possible when I'm going in front of somebody, no matter how senior. I've seen a lot of really cute models that people have come up with, and it's really sophisticated, and you need a sales engineer to run it. That's worthless.
Yeah.
It needs to be built for sales, right? And what I mean is this device is pretty simple. You put it up in a ceiling, it tells you how many people are in a space. So if I'm able to say a space at any given time is being used only 50% of the time on average, that means half of that space is wasted. So if it's a 100 square foot room, 50 square feet of that room is being wasted. So then I say, all right, well, what's the cost per square foot in this building, in this region? And I just multiply out the numbers, right? And then when you think about that across a whole floor, most floors are only used about 30% or less on average. I have a really compelling case to go to the CFO and say, look, we ran this pilot with you. We found out people only come in 25% of the time. That gives you two options. One, you could sublease 3/4 of the space on this floor and get some money back. Two, you could cancel this lease and smash people in somewhere else. Or three, you could also cancel the lease and you could go and find some new space to just house this quarter of the people in an appropriately sized environment, right? So it all comes down to the math. Now, where it gets tricky, though, is sensors like these are also said to increase productivity because people are able to find which spaces are free and busy when they come into the office. Now, measuring productivity is very hard, right? It's intangible, right? It's just one of those things that's hard to prove. So we a lot of times will do it as like time savings. Sometimes we're able to work with some of the consulting firms who will give us some numbers around how, the Deloitte's, the Boston Consulting Groups, who will give us some of those metrics. But I'm more of an old school brass tacks guy. Like, it's all about the money, right? So if I can show somebody, we're gonna save you on, you need half the real estate that you do today, and that equates to $10 million over 10 years. To me, that's what moves the CFO. The productivity stuff is just a nice little kind of bonus that people can talk about over coffee,
And are there naysayers in your deals? People who either get in the way, throw FUD into it, want to push it down, kick it down the street a little bit. Next year we'll do this. 2 years from now, 2025 looks good.
And it's oh man, in our industry, it's one of the worst because these are occupancy sensors that go up in a ceiling in an office. There are other ways to solve this problem. Security badge swipes, right? So people badge in when they come in the building. That gives me a pretty good idea of where they are. You could use Wi-Fi tracking. So you can use triangulation from all the Wi-Fi routers down to everyone's
connections. Yeah.
Will tell you approximately where they are. And then there's much lower cost devices than ours that, are what we call lick 'em, stick 'em. You literally stick them underneath each one of the desks and it detects motion and says whether or not someone's there. So we're like the cream of the crop, the most expensive one. So the onus is on us to really make sure that we prove out the value there. But when we get those naysayers, it's all about, at least for me, the first thing that I like to do is a network trace. So it's like, okay, who is this person connected to? Whose boss is this person? What department are they coming from? Do I have any other connections with them? Are there any partners that work directly with this guy or who guy or gal or who have heard of them? Right. So then I can figure out what I'm working with, But when you get in front of that person, the most important thing is to do that mini discovery, not just launch into the pitch. It's like, hey, I think I understand where you're coming from. I heard from some of your colleagues that these are the things that interest you. Is this all accurate? Is there anything else you want to add? And then at least you're able to tailor your pitch a little bit more towards what they care about And I think that makes it so much more powerful and compelling to them, and at least lets you build that rapport as you continue to work through some of the challenges that they have with bringing on the technology.
Yeah. And have you been good at ferreting out, like, they'll never go for this? They're either too cheap, not technically savvy, or care.
We are generally, there's a kind of a rule of thumb we have that if the organization is using less than 3 pieces of real estate technology, because most are using somewhere around 12, that it's more than likely that they're not going to buy an optical sensor with machine learning and AI built into it. I mean, let's just be honest.
Well, that's a great thing to have, because you don't waste your time.
Right. That is one of the ways that we do qualify. And that's why it's so important to know what other systems are they using.
Yeah.
Let's figure this out. Do we even have a shot? If they tell me they're using Dinosaur, other systems, I'm thinking to myself, man, it's one of the two, right? Because sometimes you get that company that wants to do a full technology stack upgrade. So you do need to keep your eyes open for that. And if you hear like, oh, we're replacing this, we're replacing that, and we also want to put in sensors, that could be pretty good for us, right? But if you hear, oh, we're going to keep everything as it is, and we're just kind of interested in looking at what you guys got, like, I'll pass that one back to an SDR for a little while.
Okay, cool. Hey, this has been a great conversation. Where can people go to connect and follow you?
LinkedIn. LinkedIn is my primary source. I do have an Angel account as well, but LinkedIn is what I pay the most attention to, for sure.